So I'm looking for any futurist or preterist to engage with these arguments. So I want to show a couple verses about, or just some biblical facts. If you look at verse 16, it's Deuteronomy 16. Right, let's see. Right there. 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God in the place which I shall choose, in the feast of unleavened bread, in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty. So the 3 different feasts are how often? Once a year, the 3 different feasts. So they're the annual feasts. They're often translated, okay? The Day of Atonement was the annual, once per year. There was the daily sacrifice and then the annual sacrifice. Okay, let's see. I think there's another one. Just a second witness here. Let's see. I think that's right. Yeah. 3 times shall keep a feast unto me in the year. The 3 different feasts, once a year. And there's many, many. It's actually quite interesting because in the Hebrew, it literally says days, but it's translated years, a year, every year, once a year. So it's just a blatant fact that each festival, the Day of Atonement, was once per year. The day, the Passover festival, which is more than just one single day, of course, but it came on the same date every year, once per year. Okay. They're annual feasts, once per year feasts. Okay. So let me switch screens. So one of the more common ways people, if you ask the average person, let's see. This is, wait a minute. Can I share that? I hope so. Okay, there it is. Okay. Let me zoom in on that. This is a very common way you see people try to figure out the 70 weeks of Daniel. This includes a mathematical prophecy. As we have noted in previous articles, the Jewish calendars used a 360-day year, 69 weeks of 360-day years, and then you see this number often, 173,880, and they think it makes it really amazingly perfect, but that's not true. The dates don't line up, and they have to do all sorts of weird calculations to like adjust for the true year, which doesn't make any sense because we know what the Jews did. So here's the argument. It is not appropriate to count the time period by multiplying a 360-day year. Why? Did they have one day? Was each feast once every 360 days? Because they're annual feasts. No, they're not. They couldn't be, as I've argued elsewhere. The feasts are once per year. A new year doesn't start over every 360 days. So you cannot calculate the days this way or the time periods this way because it will get off from the other calendars that we correlate with the Jewish calendar in history. If you were to have one Passover every 360 days, it would not be in the spring after several years. You would just, after 30 years, you would be, well, you'd come right back around again. So after like 15 years, you would be in the exact other side of the seasonal year. And you wouldn't be able to have a lamb to sacrifice. You wouldn't have crops. So a question I might ask somebody who's calculating these 360-day years for the span from the decree of, or whatever decree you choose for the 70 weeks till when Jesus showed up. If they were, if it's appropriate to count a year as 360 days, was there one Passover every 360 days? Because there's one per year. No, the answer is no, because they had to keep it in the spring. So a 360-day year is not possible, because the purpose of the time is to actually count actual time in history from the decree, the people, so they would know. So it's anachronistic to try to read that back into it and then try to figure out the time span, when it was actually appropriate for the people to recognize the decree until Messiah came. And we know that they didn't have one feast per 360-day year. So it is not appropriate to try to force, even though they try to do that, it still actually doesn't work. And it ignores Jesus' ministry as part of that when they shorten it by doing this. And they use the wrong decree. So any system which tries to say we have to calculate years by X amount of days per year, whether it be 360, which is way off, or the Enochian calendar that uses 364 days, which is still off. Even if you were to take 365 days, which is 1 year closer to accurate for a true year regarding the seasons, even if you were to give it another day, 365, it would still be a quarter of a day off, because a year doesn't have a perfect amount of days in it. So any system that doesn't adjust its length by adding days, certain amounts of days, or an extra month every so often, so it can fluctuate above and below to keep it in line, closely in line with a true year, will fail. Even if you were to have 365 and say there's 365 days in a year, it still would screw up the Passover over that long period of 483 years. Even if you were to do 365, which nobody proposes, you would still, if you say a year is X amount of days, only the Gregorian could work by adding a leap day every 4 years. Then it could work. But of course they didn't do that. They didn't even do 365. And even if in any source that tries to say that they have it, they know, and it's 364 because it's the Enochian calendar, because of all these other reasons, it cannot work. And we know historically this wasn't an issue, and we know that the Bible says this. So in other words, when you try to make the calendar that's given in the prophetic use, the time periods are based on a purely lunar rendering of 360 days per year. This demonstrates that these time periods cannot be meant to be taken as literal. For that, it's demonstrably the case that the 42 months, which is the 3.5 years, which is the 1260 days, or time times and half a time. Yes, those are referring to the same period. Those cannot, it's impossible for them to be taken literally. And there's some people that recognize this, and so because they think the 70th week is future, they think somehow God's going to change astronomy so that the length of a year changes. The problem with that is, if you think the 1260, which is 3.5 years or 42 months, is literal because it's part of the 70th week, whether it be because the whole 70th week is future, which is false, or half of the 70th week is future, which makes more sense, but it's still false, then, but even if you do that, we know for a fact that the 69 weeks of years that are come and gone are not were those days, which are of weeks, which are years to be interpreted. If you think Jesus is Messiah, those periods of time were not counted by a 360-day year in literal history, which I demonstrate in my other videos. A day for a year, the only viable option. In other words, it's demonstrably the case that you cannot take the time periods literally, because of the connection to the 70 weeks which have passed, and we know how they render that time. So if you're holding to a preterist view that takes that time period literally and it's in the past, the 1260 or the 42 months, if you're a futurist and you take those time periods as future and to be taken literally, if the Bible's accurate, it's impossible, to be honest, I would say, without special pleading. If the Bible is accurate and consistent, you cannot take the time periods literally. I dare you to challenge me on this and to make an argument. These facts eliminate most views of biblical prophecy demonstratively. If you have integrity and you hold to one of those views, I challenge you to make an argument and engage with my argument. Leave your comment in the description and I'll set up a time to engage with you. We can know Bible prophecy and the truth exists. Do you want to know?